I used to believe that love meant staying close, close to their conversations, close to their routines, close to their lives. I thought if I stayed present enough, helpful enough, quiet enough, I would always belong. But no one tells you the quiet truth about growing older in your own child's home. You are loved, you are respected, and yet, slowly, you become optional. My name is not important in this house. I am simply Mom. Saad's mother, Sanaa's mother-in-law. And this is the story of how loving them from a distance became my peace. When Saad first asked me to move in with him in America, his voice was full of warmth. Mom, you shouldn't live alone anymore. Stay with us. This is your home. Those words stayed in my heart like a promise. A home. I imagined laughter in the kitchen, evening tea together, family dinners filled with stories, a life where I would quietly exist within their happiness. And for the first few months, it felt exactly like that. Sanaa was polite, kind in a careful way, respectful in a way that never crossed into closeness. She would ask, Mom, did you eat? But never, Mom, sit with us. It was subtle, so subtle that even I ignored it at first. Their life had a rhythm. Morning coffee together, shared jokes at the breakfast table, weekend outings, late-night movies in the living room. And I was always just outside that rhythm. Not excluded, not invited. Just there. At dinner, they would talk about work, friends, plans that I would sit quietly, smiling when they looked at me, nodding when spoken to. Sometimes Saad would say, Mom, you're too quiet. And I would laugh softly. I like listening. But the truth, I was listening for a space to belong. One evening, I set the dining table early. 3 plates, 3 glasses, 3 napkins folded neatly. I heard their laughter from the kitchen. Sanaa was showing Saad something on her phone. They were laughing like newlyweds still discovering each other. I stood there for a moment, waiting for, Mom, come sit with us. The invitation never came. Not intentionally, not cruelly, just naturally. Saturday they ate, they talked. And I slowly carried my plate back to my room. That was the first night I realized something important. Love was present, but my place in their daily life was fading. Days turned into weeks. I began adjusting without announcing it. If they watched TV in the living room, I watched something quietly on my tablet. If they ordered dinner outside, I told them I wasn't hungry. If they planned outings, I smiled and said, You two go. Enjoy. They never insisted, and I never complained, because nothing was wrong. That was the hardest part. No fights, and disrespect, and harsh words. Just a quiet distance growing inside a shared home. Sanaa was not a bad person. In fact, she was thoughtful in practical ways. She bought my favorite tea. She reminded Saad to check my medicines. She spoke to me politely. But emotional closeness, that space was reserved for their marriage. And slowly, I understood something. I was not unwanted, that I was simply not central anymore. One Sunday morning, I woke up early. The house was silent. Soft American sunlight entered through the large windows. I made tea for myself and sat near the window. From the living room, I heard their voices later. Let's go out for brunch, Sanaa said. Yes, we haven't gone out in weeks, Saad replied. A pause. Then footsteps, then laughter. Then the door closing. No one forgot me. No one ignored me. They just assumed I preferred staying home. And for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt aware. That day, I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. Instead, I asked myself one quiet question. Why am I waiting to be included in a life that is no longer centered around me? Saad had his own world now, his own responsibilities, his own emotional priorities. And that was not betrayal, that was adulthood. That realization changed something inside me. From that week onward, I made one silent decision. I stopped waiting. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly. If they ate together, I blessed them silently and ate later. If they laughed, I smiled from afar. If they made plans, I encouraged them instead of hoping to be asked. And strangely, peace began to replace expectation. One evening, Sana noticed. "Mom, you don't sit with us much these days." I looked at her gently and smiled. "I like giving you both space." She looked slightly surprised, almost guilty. But I did not say more. Because this was not about them changing. This was about me understanding. I started building a routine of my own. Morning walks in the quiet neighborhood, reading near the window, calling old friends, cooking only when I felt like it, not out of duty. For the first time in years, my life was not revolving around being needed. And something beautiful happened. I felt lighter. One night, Saad knocked on my door. "Mom, are you okay? You seem distant." I smiled at him, the same way I did when he was a child. "I am not distant, son. I am peaceful." He sat beside me, confused. "I hope we're not making you feel alone." I held his hand softly. "You are not making me alone. You are living your life." He didn't know how to respond. Because there was no accusation in my voice. Only acceptance. Distance, I learned, is not always cold. Sometimes, distance is respectful. Sometimes, distance protects love from turning into silent resentment. Had I forced my presence, had I demanded attention, had I complained about small emotional absences, our home would have filled with tension. Instead, I chose something quieter. Understanding. Months passed, and something unexpected happened. They started coming to me more. Not out of obligation, but naturally. Sana began sitting with me during tea sometimes. Saad started asking for my opinions again. Not because I demanded space, but because I stopped emotionally crowding their life. And that changed the energy of the house. One evening, Sana said softly, "Mom, you've changed. You're calmer." I smiled. I stopped waiting to be included in every moment. Now I just appreciate the moments that come. Her eyes softened. And for the first time, she sat beside me without rushing away. Love, I realized, does not always need closeness to survive. Sometimes, it breathes better with space. Sometimes, it grows stronger when expectations become lighter. I still loved my son deeply. I still cared for Sana sincerely. But I no longer measured love by attention or invitations or daily involvement. I measured it by peace. Now, when they laugh in the living room, I don't feel left out. I feel content. Because I am no longer silently asking, where do I fit? I fit exactly where I am meant to be. A mother, a presence, not the center of their world, but still part of their life. And that is enough. Loving them from a distance did not reduce my love. It refined it. It removed expectation. It removed quiet hurt. It removed the invisible exhaustion of always trying to belong. In its place, it gave me dignity. And peace. Today, I still live in the same house. Saad still calls me Mom, with the same affection. Sana still respects me in her own gentle way. Nothing dramatic changed. No confrontation, and emotional speeches, and tears at the dining table. Just one quiet transformation inside my heart. I stopped reaching for a place that no longer needed to be claimed. And in doing so, I found a peace that closeness was never giving me. Because sometimes, the most mature form of love is not holding tighter. It is stepping back softly and saying, I love you enough to give you space, and I respect myself enough to keep my peace. And that is how loving them from a distance became my peace. There is a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness feels like rejection. Solitude feels like choice. For a long time, I could not tell the difference. When I first stepped back emotionally, I worried that I was isolating myself. I worried that I was slowly becoming invisible inside my own son's home. But what I later understood was this. I was not disappearing, that I was redefining my presence. And that shift changed everything. Winter arrived quietly in our American suburb. The trees outside the house stood bare, their branches thin and honest against the gray sky. Snow began falling one evening, soft and steady. From the window in my room, I watched the neighborhood grow silent under white blankets of calm. Inside, I could hear Saad and Sanal laughing in the kitchen. Before, that sound would have pulled at something inside me. I would have stepped out, found a reason to join them, perhaps to ask if they wanted tea or to offer dessert. But that night, I stayed where I was. Not because I felt unwelcome, but because I felt complete. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders, made myself a cup of cinnamon tea, and returned to my chair by the window. The snowfall outside felt symbolic, quiet, gentle, unbothered by who was watching. That was how I wanted to love now. Soft, present, but not pressing. A few days later, something small yet meaningful happened. Sana knocked on my door. "Mom, we're making hot chocolate. Would you like some?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes carried something new, attentiveness. "Yes," I said warmly. When I joined them in the kitchen, I didn't stand on the side like before. I didn't hover. I simply leaned against the counter and talked. Not too much, not too little. Balanced. Saad looked at me and smiled. "You should come out more often, Mom." I smiled back gently. "I come when I feel like it." And that was the difference. I no longer came out of fear of missing something. I came out of desire. And desire is healthier than need. Over time, I noticed something subtle about Sana. She began asking for my advice, not about big decisions, but small ones. "What do you think about this curtain color? Do you think this recipe needs more spice? Is this dress too formal?" Before, I would have answered eagerly, almost over-explaining. Now, I responded calmly, thoughtfully, because I no longer needed to prove my usefulness. And when you stop trying to prove your value, people begin to see it more clearly. One Sunday afternoon, Saad came into my room unexpectedly. "Mom," he said, sitting down beside me, "I've been thinking." His tone was serious. I closed my book and looked at him. "I feel like we didn't realize how much you were adjusting for us." I didn't interrupt. He continued, "You gave us space before we even knew we needed it." I smiled softly. "That's what parents do," I replied. But inside, I felt something deeper, recognition. Not dramatic gratitude, not emotional guilt, just acknowledgement. And sometimes, acknowledgement is enough. That evening, I thought about the early days after Saad's marriage. How I had tried to remain central, how I had tried to stay needed, how I had quietly feared being replaced. It wasn't that I wanted control. It was that I wanted relevance. But relevance does not come from constant presence. It comes from steady character. And character does not fade with distance. As spring approached, the energy in the house felt lighter. Flowers began blooming in the small garden outside. The days grew longer. The sunlight lingered. With the change in season came another quiet shift. Sana started including me in her plans occasionally. "Mom, I'm going to the farmer's market. Would you like to come?" Sometimes I said yes. Sometimes I said no. And that freedom, to choose without fear, felt empowering. Because earlier, every invitation carried emotional weight. Now, it was simply an option. One afternoon at the market, Sana and I walked side by side among fresh produce and handmade crafts. She picked up strawberries and asked, "Did you ever imagine living here?" I laughed softly. Life rarely asks for our imagination before it changes. She looked thoughtful. "Was it hard for you, moving here?" I paused. "Yes," I said honestly. "But not for the reasons you think." She waited. It wasn't the language, or the culture, or the weather. It was learning where I belonged in a life that was no longer centered around me. She didn't respond immediately, but she squeezed my arm gently. And that small gesture carried understanding. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I reflected on something powerful. Distance had not created coldness. It had created clarity. When I was constantly present, my emotions were tangled, expectation mixed with love, hope mixed with disappointment. But when I stepped back, love became pure. No hidden conditions, no silent requests, no emotional bargaining. Just love. Months passed. One evening, we were all sitting together watching a movie. Halfway through, Saad leaned his head against the couch and said jokingly, "Mom, you're the calmest person in this house." I smiled. If only he knew. Calmness is not something you are born with. It is something you choose after emotional storms. And my storm had been quiet, invisible even, but powerful. The storm of expectation. The storm of wanting to belong without asking. The storm of fearing irrelevance. But storms pass. And what remains afterward is either bitterness or wisdom. I chose wisdom. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet. The clock ticked softly. I thought about my younger self. The mother who stayed awake when Saad was sick. The woman who built her world around her child's needs. The one who believed motherhood meant eternal centrality. But children grow, and their lives expand. And if mothers do not expand with them, they shrink inside. I refused to shrink. Instead, I expanded inward. I rediscovered parts of myself I had forgotten. My love for reading, my interest in community work, my quiet strength. And the more I reconnected with myself, the less I needed constant emotional reassurance from them. One day, Sanaa said something that stayed with me. "You give us so much freedom, Mom. I hope we're giving you enough too." I looked at her gently. "You give me what matters, respect." She nodded slowly. Because respect is quieter than attention, but stronger. There was no dramatic turning point in our family. No grand apology. No emotional family meeting. Just gradual growth. And I realized something important. Peace does not come from changing others. It comes from adjusting your expectations without lowering your standards. I did not lower my standards for love. I simply stopped expecting it to look the same as it did 20 years ago. Love evolves. And if we refuse to evolve with it, we suffer. Now, when I wake up in the morning, I no longer measure my day by how much time we spend together. Sometimes we share breakfast. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we sit and talk for hours. Sometimes we pass each other quietly in the hallway. And none of it shakes my peace. Because my peace is no longer built on proximity. It is built on understanding. Loving them from a distance did not mean loving them less. It meant loving them without pressure, without silent tests, without emotional waiting. And in that distance, I found space for myself again. Space to breathe, space to grow, space to exist not just as mom, but as a woman with her own inner world. If someone asked me today, "Do you ever feel left out?" I would answer honestly, no. Because I no longer stand outside emotional doors waiting to be invited. I walk into moments naturally when they welcome me. And when they don't, I walk peacefully into my own space. And that quiet self-respect is the greatest peace I have ever known. Loving them from a distance did not break our bond. It strengthened it. Because love that is not forced becomes lighter. And light things last longer. There was a time when I believed that closeness was proof of love. If we sat together, we were connected. If we talked often, we were bonded. That if they needed me, I mattered. But life, especially in a country like this, has a different rhythm. In America, everyone values independence. Even love is given space to breathe. And slowly, I learned that closeness is not always measured by physical presence. Sometimes, it is measured by emotional steadiness. One evening, Saad and Sanaa had friends over. The house was lively. Laughter, music, the smell of fresh food filling the air. I stayed in my room at first, not because I felt excluded, but because I understood this was their world. Young conversations, shared jokes, stories I did not need to enter. Later, Sanaa knocked softly. "Mom, would you like to join us for a bit?" There was no obligation in her voice. No guilt. Just sincerity. And because I felt no emotional hunger, I joined them with ease. I sat for a while, smiled at their stories, shared one memory of Saad as a child that made everyone laugh. And then, after some time, I excused myself naturally. No hurt, and overthinking. Just balance. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something beautiful. When you stop clinging to moments, moments begin to feel lighter. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. I received a call from an old friend back home. She sounded tired. "My son barely talks to me anymore," she said. "I feel invisible." Her voice carried the pain I once felt. For a moment, I saw my old self, sitting quietly at the edge of rooms, waiting to be noticed. I listened carefully before speaking. Are you waiting for him to come to you? I asked gently. Yes, she replied. Then stop waiting, I said softly. But don't become bitter. Build your own space. Let him come when he's ready. She was silent for a while. It's hard, she whispered. Yes, I admitted. But peace is harder to find when you keep holding on. After that call, I understood something deeper. My journey was not just about my family. It was about emotional maturity. One afternoon, Saad sat beside me while I was folding laundry. Mom, he said casually, Sana told me you've been volunteering more. Yes, I replied. It feels good to be useful outside the house. He looked thoughtful. I'm glad you have your own world. That sentence, simple and honest, warmed my heart. Because, once upon a time, my entire world revolved around him. Now I had rebuilt it. And he respected that. There was no dramatic apology from anyone. No emotional confession of mistakes. But something much more valuable had formed between us. Mutual space. They didn't feel suffocated. They didn't feel suffocated that I didn't feel neglected. And in that balance, love felt calmer. More adult. More real. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about motherhood. About how deeply we attach our identity to our children. We pour our youth, our energy, our dreams into raising them. And somewhere along the way, we forget to leave room for ourselves. When they grow, we feel displaced. But perhaps the truth is this. We were never meant to remain the center of their world. We were meant to prepare them for a world where we are not. And when we accept that with grace, motherhood becomes peaceful instead of painful. One Sunday, the three of us sat together over breakfast. Sana reached for my hand suddenly. Mom, I'm grateful you're here. It was simple, unexpected. I smiled warmly. I'm grateful too. And in that moment, there was no emotional weight behind those words. Just genuine affection. Because distance had removed the silent tension that once lived inside me. Now, when I sit by the window in the mornings, watching the quiet suburban street wake up, I feel content. Cars pass by. Neighbors walk their dogs. Sunlight stretches across the lawns. Inside the house, Saad and Sana move through their day. Sometimes we share it closely, sometimes we don't. But I no longer measure love by frequency. I measure it by peace. And my heart is peaceful. Loving them from a distance did not mean stepping away physically. It meant stepping away emotionally from expectation. It meant understanding that love does not need to be proven daily. It meant trusting that my place as a mother is secure, even when it is not constantly visible. And perhaps that is what growing older truly teaches you. Not how to hold on, but how to let love breathe. If someone asked me today what changed in our home, I would say, nothing. And everything. The walls are the same, the furniture is the same, the people are the same. But my heart is different. And when the heart changes, the whole house feels lighter. I still cook sometimes. I still sit with them in the evenings. I still laugh when Saad makes his familiar jokes. But I no longer sit in any room wondering if I belong there. Because belonging is no longer something I wait for. It is something I carry within myself. And that is why loving them from a distance became my peace. Not because I loved less, but because I finally loved without losing myself. And that kind of love is the calmest love of all.